3,000 years ago, there was a people who believed that God had promised them a land. 2,000 years ago, that very people were driven out of that land. And for nearly 2 millennia afterward, they had no country, no sovereignty, no map bearing their name, yet they endured. So the question arises, what is stronger than empires, stronger than swords, stronger even than the forgetting of history? The land today called Israel lies at the crossroads of 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa. In ancient times, this area belonged to the region of Canaan, a narrow strip along the Mediterranean where Semitic tribes had lived since the 3rd millennium before Christ. Around the 13th century before Christ, a stone stele of Pharaoh Merneptah, carved around 1208 before Christ, recorded a name, Israel. This is the earliest extra-biblical evidence mentioning Israel as a community in Canaan. That means by the late 13th century before Christ, Israel already existed as a social entity significant enough to be noted by an Egyptian empire. Around the 10th century before Christ, according to both biblical tradition and many modern archaeological studies, the tribes of Israel united into a kingdom under King Saul, followed by King David and King Solomon. Around 1000 before Christ, King David is believed to have chosen Jerusalem as the capital. His son, King Solomon, built the first temple in Jerusalem, a religious center and political symbol of the Jewish people. But history never follows a peaceful straight line. After Solomon, the kingdom split in 2, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. In 722 before Christ, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. By 586 before Christ, the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed Jerusalem and the first temple and exiled the elite of Judah to Babylon. This was the first great exile. However, in 539 before Christ, the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return. The Second Temple was rebuilt in 516 before Christ. The memory of loss and restoration became part of the very structure of this people's soul. But the decisive turning point came in the year 70 after Christ. After a revolt against Rome, the Roman army under General Titus destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The temple collapsed, and the spiritual center was erased from the earth. 65 years later, from 132 to 135 after Christ, the Bar Kokhba revolt broke out. When this uprising was suppressed, Emperor Hadrian decided to rename the province of Judea as Syria Palestina. This was not merely an administrative decision. It was a political attempt to sever the connection between the Jewish people and their ancestral land. A new name was imposed upon the map. But can a map rewrite memory? From the 2nd century after Christ onward, the Jewish people entered the period of the diaspora, scattered exile across the Mediterranean, Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. They no longer had a kingdom, no army, no territorial sovereignty. Yet they preserved what mattered most, religious law, the memory of Jerusalem, and the prayer "Next Year in Jerusalem," recited at every Passover for nearly 2,000 years. While many ancient peoples were absorbed into great empires, the Jews developed a system of religious law, halakha, as a social structure replacing the state. One might say they transformed faith into a portable homeland, where each family and each small community became a fragment of an invisible nation. The land of Palestine, over the next 2,000 years, came under the control of the Byzantine Empire, the Arab Islamic Caliphates from the 7th century, and then the Ottoman Empire from 1517 to 1917. Throughout this entire period, Jews remained present in small numbers, living alongside Muslim and Christian Arab communities. Jerusalem became a holy city for 3 major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each brought its own layer of memory, its own narrative of salvation, its own belief in a sacred claim to the land. And from there, latent tensions began to accumulate across the centuries. The paradox lies in this. While the Jewish people preserved the memory of a lost homeland, on that very land, other communities had formed their own lives, traditions, and identities. The history of Israel is therefore not a single linear flow, but a layering of memory and reality. Every stone in Jerusalem is both a relic of past empires and a symbol of living faith. So what sustains a people when there are no borders? What allows a name carved on an Egyptian stela more than 3,000 years ago to still echo in the 21st century? Could it be that collective memory, transmitted through scripture, ritual, and family, is stronger than the power of the empires that once ruled this land? The next part of the story will take us to the late 19th century, when an ancient dream began to transform into a concrete political program. But before entering the modern era, we must understand this. Israel is not merely a state founded in 1948. It is the crystallization of 3,000 years of memory, of collapse and rebirth, of a question that has never faded. How long can a people endure if all that remains is faith? If in the previous part we saw a people stripped of their land, yet still holding on to memory, then in this part we enter a different story. The story of how that memory was sustained for nearly 2,000 years, not by swords, but by prayers, sacred texts, and family meals lit by the candles of the Sabbath. After the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 135 after Christ, the Jewish people entered a period of wide dispersion across the Mediterranean and beyond. Without a political center in Jerusalem, without a temple to make pilgrimage to, they were forced to reconstruct their entire spiritual life. From the 2nd century to the 5th century, Jewish scholars compiled and completed the Talmud, first the Jerusalem Talmud, then the Babylonian Talmud, finalized around the 5th century after Christ. This body of law and religious interpretation not only guided moral life, but also organized communities, resolved disputes, regulated marriage, commerce, and education. In the absence of a state, religious law became the foundation of social order. Many historians argue that this scholarly and legal structure enabled the Jewish people to maintain their identity across generations without dissolving into surrounding populations. During the Middle Ages, Jewish communities lived in many regions with very different destinies. In the Iberian Peninsula under Islamic rule from the 8th century, particularly between the 10th and 12th centuries, cities such as Cordoba and Granada became vibrant centers of Jewish culture. The philosopher and physician Maimonides, born in 1138 in Cordoba, stands as a testament to the interaction between Judaism and Islamic scholarship. But history is not always favorable. In 1492, the Alhambra decree issued by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella forced Jews to convert or leave Spain. Tens of thousands departed, carrying with them their memory and the Ladino language to North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and the Balkans. In Central and Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi Jewish communities developed strongly from the 13th century onward. However, they also endured waves of violence and expulsion. In 1290, King Edward I expelled Jews from England. In 1306, they were expelled from France under another decree. The massacres during the Crusades, beginning in 1096, left deep scars in collective memory. Yet amid these trials, intellectual and religious life continued to be sustained in synagogues and small schools. One detail often overlooked is that for many centuries, Jews did not live entirely separate from the land of Palestine. Under the Ottoman Empire, from 1517 to 1917, small Jewish communities continued to reside in Jerusalem, Safed, Hebron, and Tiberias. In the 16th century, Safed even became a center of Jewish mysticism, where Rabbi Isaac Luria developed Kabbalah with lasting influence. Though never the majority, this continuous presence ensured that the connection to the ancestral land was never completely severed. What astonishes many scholars is the ability to sustain a sense of homeland over such a long period. During the annual Passover, the phrase, "Next year in Jerusalem," was not a political slogan, but a sacred promise. It was passed from parents to children, from one community to another, in small homes in Poland, Morocco, or Yemen. When a people has no borders, they build a border within the mind. When there is no official map, they redraw their homeland in collective memory. Yet memory can also become a source of conflict. On that same land, Muslim and Christian Arab communities had lived continuously for centuries, developing their own languages, cultures, and identities. The land was never empty during the Jewish exile. Two streams of memory, one rooted in religious tradition and the longing for return, the other grounded in continuous presence and lived reality, quietly coexisted. History had not yet collided directly, but the fault lines had already formed. Perhaps the most thought-provoking aspect is not how a people survived, but what they preserved during the years without sovereignty. When law, scripture, and family replaced the state, the concept of homeland gradually became a spiritual reality. And when that spiritual reality becomes strong enough, it seeks to enter political life. By the late 19th century, amid the upheavals of European nationalism and the rise of anti-Semitism, centuries of memory began to transform into an organized movement. The dream of return no longer remained only in prayer, but was preparing to enter assembly halls, congresses, and new declarations. That story will unfold in the next part, when an Austrian journalist decided to put pen to paper about a nation that did not yet exist, but had lived for thousands of years in the imagination. By the end of the 19th century, Europe entered the age of national manifestos. Italians spoke of a unified Italy, Germans of a German empire, and the Balkan peoples rose demanding self-determination. In that atmosphere, a question began to echo within the Jewish community. If other nations have the right to a homeland, why not the Jewish people? Not in scripture, not in memory, but on a real map. In 1896, an Austrian journalist of Jewish origin named Theodor Herzl published a book titled Der Judenstaat, meaning the Jewish state. He was not a rabbi, nor a theologian, but an observer of his time. In 1894, Herzl was in Paris reporting on the Dreyfus affair, a Jewish officer in the French army who was wrongly convicted of treason. As crowds in Paris shouted, "Death to the Jews!" Herzl realized that even in the most enlightened nations of Europe, Jews could still be seen as outsiders. From that shock, he reached a conclusion. The Jewish question could not be solved through assimilation or social reform alone. It required a political solution, a sovereign state. Der Judenstaat was not a scripture, but a proposal. Herzl wrote about establishing a Jewish state recognized internationally, with financial organization and planned migration. He did not immediately define a specific territory, but Palestine, the ancestral land in Jewish tradition, soon became the central focus of discussion. 1 year later, from the 29th to the 31st of August in 1897, the First Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland. More than 200 delegates from across Europe attended. The Congress adopted the Basel Program, declaring the goal of establishing a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine secured by public law. In his private diary, Herzl recorded a famous line, "At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I said this aloud today, people would laugh. But perhaps in 5 years, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will see it." Herzl died in 1904 at the age of 44. He did not live to witness the realization of his vision. However, the Zionist movement did not stop. Waves of Jewish migration to Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire, began to increase from the late 19th century. The first wave, commonly called the First Aliyah, took place from 1882 to 1903. The second wave, from 1904 to 1914, brought young people with socialist ideals, laying the foundations for the kibbutz, collective agricultural communities. Fields were reclaimed, new towns were formed, and a new social structure was gradually taking shape on the ancient land. However, the Zionist movement was not universally supported by Jews from the beginning. Some Orthodox rabbis believed that re-establishing a state before the coming of the Messiah went against divine will. Some Jews in Western Europe believed they had successfully assimilated and did not need a separate homeland. Outside the Jewish community, Arab residents in Palestine also began to worry about the new waves of immigration. From the early years of the 20th century, tensions between the two communities gradually increased. Sporadic conflicts had already occurred even before the map of the Middle East was redrawn after the First World War. The First World War broke out in 1914 and ended in 1918, leading to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Palestine fell under British control. In this context, on the 2nd of November in 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour sent a letter to Lord Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community. This letter, later known as the Balfour Declaration, stated that the British government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. At the same time, Britain had made other commitments to Arab leaders regarding the future of the land after the war. These overlapping promises laid the groundwork for disputes that have never been fully resolved. From 1920, Britain officially governed Palestine under a League of Nations mandate. Jewish immigration continued to rise, especially during the 1930s, when the Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933. The increase in Jewish population, along with economic and political tensions, led to the Arab Revolt in Palestine from 1936 to 1939. The British attempted to balance between the two communities, but increasingly found themselves in a deadlock. Zionism, from a dream in books, had become an organized political force, with representative institutions, self-defense groups, and an international network of diplomatic advocacy. Alongside hope stood the fear of another community on the same land. Two aspirations coexisted, each believing in the legitimacy of its own claim. As the mid-20th century approached, the world was about to witness an event that would completely reshape the landscape. None of the delegates at Basel in 1897 could have imagined the scale of the tragedy about to unfold in Europe, nor the moral weight it would place upon the international stage. The Zionist movement was awaiting a historical turning point, and that turning point would arrive in the darkest years of humanity. The 20th century began with political hopes still taking shape, but only a few decades later, humanity descended into an unprecedented abyss. On the 30th of January in 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. From that moment, anti-Semitism was no longer a scattered social prejudice, but became state policy. The Nuremberg Laws were enacted on the 15th of September in 1935, stripping German Jews of citizenship and prohibiting marriage between Jews and Aryans. The doors of Europe gradually closed. On the night of the 9th into the early hours of the 10th of November in 1938, the event known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, took place across Germany and Austria. More than 1,000 synagogues were destroyed, thousands of Jewish-owned shops were smashed, and around 30,000 Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. This was not merely a riot, but a signal of a far more brutal plan taking shape. When the Second World War broke out on the 1st of September in 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland, the fate of millions of Jews in Europe entered its darkest chapter. On the 20th of January in 1942, at the Wannsee Villa in Berlin, senior Nazi officials met to coordinate what they called the final solution to the Jewish question. From that point, the system of extermination camps was operated on an industrial scale. Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, these names became symbols of calculated destruction. By the time the war ended on the 8th of May in 1945 in Europe, approximately 6 million Jews had been murdered. That number is not merely a statistic. It represents families erased, local languages extinguished, and towns once filled with prayer turned into silent voids. In that context, Palestine, under British mandate, became a destination for many survivors. Yet the British authorities, based on the White Paper of 1939, strictly limited Jewish immigration in an attempt to ease tensions with the Arab community. Ships carrying Holocaust survivors trying to reach the shores of Palestine were sometimes intercepted. The ship Exodus, which left France in July of 1947 with more than 4,500 Jewish refugees, was seized by the British Navy and forced to return to Europe. The image of people who had just escaped concentration camps being denied refuge shocked international public opinion. The situation in Palestine grew increasingly tense. Jewish paramilitary organizations such as Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi carried out multiple operations targeting British objectives. The bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem on the 22nd of July in 1946, carried out by Irgun, killed 91 people. This event shook British politics and turned the Palestine issue into a political burden that could no longer be sustained. At the beginning of 1947, Britain decided to bring the Palestine question before the United Nations. On the 29th of November in 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, proposing to partition Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under a special international regime. The plan was accepted by the Jewish side, but rejected by Arab leaders. Immediately after the vote, violence between the two communities erupted. Civil war in Palestine lasted from late 1947 until mid-May in 1948, even before a new state was officially declared. At 16 hours on the 14th of May in 1948, in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence, proclaiming the establishment of the State of Israel as the British mandate ended. Just hours later, the armies of Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq entered the territory of former Palestine. The First Arab-Israeli War began on the 15th of May in 1948. For Israelis, it was the War of Independence. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Around 700,000 Palestinian Arabs left or were forced to leave their homes during the conflict. The war ended with armistice agreements in 1949, establishing new boundaries but failing to resolve the root causes of the conflict. A nation was born amid gunfire, carrying both the hope of survivors and the loss of other communities. From the ashes of the Holocaust and in the midst of war, Israel entered international life as a member of the United Nations on the 11th of May in 1949. Alongside recognition came an undeniable reality. This conflict had not ended, it had only changed form. When the smoke cleared, the map of the Middle East had changed, but the emotions of the peoples involved remained: pride, grief, insecurity, and the desire to live in safety. The next part of the journey will take us into the continuing wars of the following decades, where each victory or defeat left deep marks on the psyche of a young nation. The State of Israel was born in war, but the challenges did not end when the armistice agreements were signed in 1949. In the first decade of independence, this young nation faced three simultaneous challenges: security, immigrant integration, and institutional development. Within just a few years after 1948, Israel's population nearly doubled due to waves of Jewish immigrants from post-war Europe and from Arab countries such as Iraq, Yemen, and Morocco. Temporary camps were erected, new settlements formed across a land still marked by war. A multi-ethnic society began to take shape, with significant cultural differences between Ashkenazi Jews from Europe and Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Meanwhile, border tensions never truly subsided. On the 26th of July in 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. In October of that year, Israel, in coordination with Britain and France, launched a military operation into the Sinai Peninsula. On the 29th of October in 1956, Israeli forces entered Sinai, marking the beginning of the Suez Crisis. Although achieving rapid military success, Israel withdrew in early 1957 under international pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union. The crisis made one reality clear. In this region, every military action was tied to the global chessboard of the Cold War. The next major turning point came in June of 1967. After weeks of rising tensions with neighboring Arab states, on the 5th of June in 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt. Within 6 days of fighting, by the 10th of June in 1967, Israel had taken control of the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The territory under Israeli control expanded several times over. Images of Israeli soldiers standing before the Western Wall in Jerusalem were broadcast worldwide, evoking deep emotion among many Jews. However, that victory also placed Israel in the position of governing millions of Palestinians in the newly occupied territories. A complex political reality emerged, one that would persist for decades to come. On the 6th of October in 1973, during the sacred Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The Yom Kippur War lasted until the 25th of October in 1973. In the early days, Israel suffered heavy losses and was placed in a dangerous position. Although Israeli forces ultimately pushed back their opponents, the shock to national security shook society. The Agranat Commission was established to investigate failures in preparation. Confidence in invincibility was tested, and Israeli politics entered a period of profound transformation. In 1977, the Likud party led by Menachem Begin won the parliamentary elections, ending decades of labor dominance. Amid these upheavals, an unexpected door opened. On the 19th of November in 1977, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat visited Jerusalem and addressed the Knesset. This historic visit led to the Camp David Accords, signed on the 17th of September in 1978 between Egypt and Israel under the auspices of the United States. The official peace treaty between the two countries was signed on the 26th of March in 1979. Israel agreed to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, a process completed in 1982. This marked the first time Israel achieved peace with a neighboring Arab state. The image of Begin and Sadat shaking hands showed that conflict is not an unchangeable destiny. Nevertheless, the regional picture remained dark in many places. In 1982, Israel launched a military operation in Lebanon aimed at pushing the Palestine Liberation Organization out of southern Lebanon. This intervention was prolonged and deeply controversial within Israel. The protests in Tel Aviv following the Sabra and Shatila massacre in September of 1982 showed that Israeli society was not a monolithic bloc, but one characterized by ongoing debate and reflection. By the late 1980s, a Palestinian uprising in the West Bank and Gaza, known as the First Intifada, began in December of 1987. Images of youths throwing stones facing armed soldiers appeared in international media, reshaping global perceptions of the conflict. Israel entered a phase where the central question was no longer only security, but also the future of coexistence between two peoples on the same land. Over more than 3 decades, Israel had experienced war, peace, victory, and crises of confidence. The nation grew through adversity, but also gradually realized that military strength alone could not resolve all political and human challenges. As the 1990s began, a new effort to seek a lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would emerge, opening a chapter filled with both hope and tragedy in modern history. Entering the 1990s, the atmosphere in the Middle East carried both exhaustion and a desire for change. After decades of confrontation, both Israelis and Palestinians understood that the cycle of violence could not continue indefinitely without causing deeper wounds. The Cold War ended in 1991, altering the global balance and creating new political space for dialogue. In this context, secret negotiations between representatives of Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization took place in Oslo, Norway. On the 13th of September in 1993, on the lawn of the White House in Washington, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestine Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat shook hands under the observation of United States President Bill Clinton. The Declaration of Principles on Interim Self-Government Arrangements, commonly known as the Oslo Accords, was signed. This agreement recognized each side and laid the foundation for the establishment of the Palestinian National Authority to govern parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. That handshake brought many to tears, as it symbolized the possibility of reconciliation between two peoples who had long faced each other through gun sights. In 1994, Rabin, Arafat, and Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts in advancing the Oslo process. That same year, Israel and Jordan signed a peace treaty on the 26th of October in 1994, officially ending the state of war between them. For the first time in modern history, Israel had peace with two neighboring Arab states. The future seemed to open a new path. Yet alongside hope came fierce opposition from extremist factions on both sides. On the 4th of November in 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in Tel Aviv by an Israeli extremist opposed to the peace process. The crowd at the peace rally that day had been singing Shir La Shalom, Song for Peace, and the blood-stained lyric sheet found on Rabin became a symbol of a dream cut short. His death was not only a personal tragedy, but also a fracture in the fragile belief in coexistence. In the years that followed, negotiations faced repeated deadlock. The Second Camp David Summit in July of 2000 between Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat failed to reach a final agreement. In September of 2000, following a visit by Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem, a new wave of violence erupted, commonly known as the Second Intifada. This period lasted several years, marked by suicide bombings and military responses, causing heavy losses on both sides. The security barrier that Israel began constructing in the West Bank in 2002 became a deeply controversial symbol, seen by some as protection and by others as a dividing wall. While the conflict with the Palestinians continued to evolve in complex ways, Israel also underwent profound changes in its economy and technology. From the 1990s onward, the country promoted market reforms and invested heavily in education and scientific research. Many high-tech companies were founded, transforming Israel into one of the most dynamic startup hubs in the world. The arid fields of the Negev were made green through drip irrigation technology. This transformation did not erase security concerns, but it revealed another dimension of the country, a drive to build and innovate amid instability. At the beginning of the 21st century, Israel continued to face numerous regional challenges. In 2006, the war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, lasting from July to August, resulted in thousands of casualties and significant infrastructure damage. In 2005, Israel withdrew all settlements and military forces from the Gaza Strip, under a plan initiated by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. However, conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza continued in the years that followed, with multiple escalations of violence. On the 15th of September in 2020, Israel signed normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain in Washington, known as the Abraham Accords. Subsequently, Sudan and Morocco also established diplomatic relations with Israel. These developments showed that the diplomatic map of the Middle East was no longer fixed, and that some Arab states were willing to cooperate with Israel in areas such as economics and security. Alongside these changes, the question of the future of the Palestinian people and the two-state solution remained unresolved. Negotiation rounds continued, but failed to reach a final agreement on borders, Jerusalem, refugees, and security. Israel entered the 21st century as a technological power, a vibrant democracy, and at the same time a nation living in a state of constant vigilance. Amid achievements and challenges, the story of Israel is no longer only about survival, but about seeking balance between security and reconciliation, between memory of the past and responsibility in the present. That journey continues, and in the next part, we will look more deeply into the society within this country, where cultural, religious, and political differences coexist, debate, and shape the future of a nation that is never still. If one looks at Israel from the outside, it is easy to see news about conflict, negotiations, agreements, and tensions. But within the borders of that country lies a complex society, where multiple layers of memory and diverse cultural origins coexist on a narrow strip of land. The story of Israel is not only about external relations, but also about an internal journey of self-definition. By the beginning of the 21st century, Israel's population consisted mostly of Jews and about 1/5 Arab citizens, primarily Palestinians holding Israeli citizenship, According to data published by the Israel Central Bureau of Statistics in 2022, the population exceeded 9 million. Within the Jewish community, diversity is significant. Ashkenazi Jews trace their origins to Europe, while Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews come from North Africa and the Middle East. In addition, there is the Ethiopian Jewish community, whose major waves of migration occurred during Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991. Each community brought its own language, customs, and memories, contributing to a richly layered social landscape. Israel is a parliamentary democracy. The Knesset, its unicameral parliament, has 120 seats. The nationwide proportional representation electoral system often results in multi-party coalitions. Since 1948, Israel has never adopted a complete constitution. Instead, it operates based on basic laws, gradually enacted over time. This approach reflects caution and also reveals internal debates about identity. Israel is the state of the Jewish people, yet at the same time a state of all its citizens. A controversial milestone occurred on the 19th of July in 2018 when the Knesset passed the Basic Law, Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people. This document affirms that the right to national self-determination in Israel is unique to the Jewish people and designates Hebrew as the official language, while Arabic holds a special status. For many Jews, the law reinforces national identity. For some Arab citizens, it raises concerns of exclusion. Debate unfolded not only in parliament, but also on the streets, in universities, and in the press. Such disagreements illustrate a society in constant motion, never confined to a single voice. Daily life in Israel also carries its own paradoxes. Tel Aviv is known as a vibrant center of technology and culture, with startup companies and international art festivals. Jerusalem follows a different rhythm, where Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods exist alongside historic Arab quarters, where church bells, the call to prayer from mosques, and the recitation of the Torah can all be heard in a single afternoon. On those streets, physical proximity does not always mean closeness of spirit. In the 2010s, social protests erupted in response to the high cost of living and demands for economic fairness, most notably the tent protest movement in the summer of 2011 in Tel Aviv. Young people took to the streets not because of war, but because of housing prices and employment opportunities. This shows that beyond security concerns, Israel must also confront the universal questions faced by modern societies: inequality, housing, education, and the relationship between religion and the state. The series of elections from 2019 to 2022 reflected deep political polarization. Coalition governments changed multiple times, indicating a society searching for balance among different tendencies. This dynamism can sometimes create a sense of instability, but it is also a sign of a democratic system in constant debate. Amid all these differences, what stands out is the capacity for open debate. A free press, an independent judiciary, and civil society organizations play an important role in shaping the direction of the nation. The Supreme Court of Israel has repeatedly issued rulings on sensitive issues related to security and civil rights. In 2023, proposed judicial reforms triggered large-scale protests across the country, showing that citizens are willing to speak out when they feel the structure of power is being altered. This event affirmed that Israel's identity is defined not only by a history of conflict, but also by its ability to self-correct through dialogue and criticism. A nation born out of upheaval must now learn how to live with its own internal diversity. Differences in origin, religion, and political views do not disappear, but they compel society to constantly negotiate with itself. The question is no longer simply how to survive, but how to coexist under the same national roof. Looking at this social structure, one realizes that every foreign policy or military decision reflects complex internal considerations. And it is precisely from these internal dynamics that Israel's direction in the region and on the international stage will continue to be shaped in the years ahead. Entering the 2020s, the Middle East once again witnessed changes that would have seemed unlikely just a few years earlier. On the 15th of September in 2020, At the White House, Israel signed normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. This document is known as the Abraham Accords. By the 23rd of October in 2020, Sudan announced normalization of relations with Israel, and on the 10th of December in 2020, Morocco made a similar decision. These moves mark the first time since the peace treaty with Jordan in 1994 that Israel established formal relations with multiple Arab countries without a comprehensive agreement with the Palestinians beforehand. The diplomatic map of the region shifted, showing that strategic and economic interests could overcome boundaries once considered fixed. At the same time, underlying tensions did not disappear. The Gaza Strip continued to be a flashpoint for cycles of violence between Israel and Hamas. The round of conflict in May of 2021, lasting 11 days, resulted in hundreds of deaths on both sides and deeply affected civilian life. Each wave of violence left behind destroyed neighborhoods, families who lost loved ones, and children growing up with memories of sirens and shelters. In such moments, the question of security is no longer abstract, but becomes a daily reality. A major event that profoundly altered the situation occurred on the 7th of October in 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel, causing significant casualties among civilians and soldiers. The Israeli government declared a state of war and launched a large-scale military campaign in Gaza. The subsequent conflict created a severe humanitarian crisis and raised concerns about broader regional instability. Images from both sides revealed suffering that transcends nationality or religion. It became one of the most challenging periods for Israeli society since the beginning of the 21st century. On the strategic level, Israel continues to closely monitor Iran's nuclear program and shifts in the regional balance of power. Security relations with the United States remain a key pillar, while Israel also expands economic and technological cooperation with Asia and Europe. Fields such as cybersecurity, biomedicine, and artificial intelligence are developing rapidly, reinforcing Israel's position as a global center of innovation. Meanwhile, internal debates over judicial reform and national identity persist, reflecting a society that continuously questions itself. Amid achievements and challenges, Israel moves along a path full of twists and turns. On one hand lies the aspiration for deeper regional integration through diplomacy and economic cooperation. On the other, the reality of an unresolved conflict. Every policy decision is weighed between immediate security needs and the vision of long-term peace. The people of Israel, as well as the Palestinian people, must live with the constant interplay between hope and uncertainty. Perhaps the greatest question of this era is no longer whether Israel can survive, but which path it will choose to shape its future within a Middle East that is being restructured. In the next part, we will revisit this entire journey from a concluding perspective to understand why the story of Israel is not only the history of a nation, but also a mirror reflecting the shared contradictions and aspirations of humanity. When looking back at the entire journey of Israel from the late 19th century to the present, one can easily be drawn into the milestones of war, peace agreements, and political upheavals. But if we step back, it becomes clear that this story is not merely a timeline of events, but a sequence of choices with far-reaching consequences, each decision leaving a lasting impact not only on Israel, but on the entire region. Israel is one of the few modern states born from a resolution of the United Nations, specifically Resolution 181 of the 29th of November in 1947, and officially declared on the 14th of May in 1948. This fact ties the existence of the state closely to international law from the very beginning. On the 11th of May, in 1949, Israel became a member of the United Nations. From a young entity surrounded by war, Israel gradually established diplomatic relations with dozens of countries, joined international organizations, and signed numerous agreements in trade, science, and defense. Alongside this integration are unresolved debates over borders and sovereignty. After the war in 1967, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 242 on the 22nd of November in 1967, calling for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from occupied territories and the recognition of the right of all states in the region to live in peace within secure boundaries. This document became the foundation for many subsequent diplomatic efforts, though differing interpretations have made the peace process difficult. Israel itself has repeatedly asserted its right to self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, while the international community continues to call for negotiated solutions. Over more than 7 decades of existence, Israel has not only faced external conflicts, but has also had to define its position between two axes of values. On one side, the identity of a Jewish state, on the other, the principles of modern democracy. Balancing these two elements has not always been smooth. Elections, protests, and court rulings all reflect a society that continually questions itself. What is notable is that despite numerous political crises, Israel has maintained regular elections and peaceful transfers of power within a legal framework. In economic terms, Israel has undergone a strong transformation from a centrally planned economy in its early years to a dynamic market economy. Economic reforms in the mid-1980s helped control high inflation and laid the foundation for later high-tech growth. Today, Israel is considered one of the world's leading centers for research and development in terms of investment as a percentage of gross domestic product. These statistics may seem dry, but behind them are millions of stories of immigrant families, of students conducting research in laboratories, of entrepreneurs building startups in an uncertain environment. Nevertheless, it cannot be denied that the conflict with the Palestinians remains the central issue shaping Israel's image on the international stage. Multiple rounds of negotiations, from Oslo in 1993 to later efforts, have yet to produce a final resolution. Questions about future borders, the status of Jerusalem, and the rights of Palestinian refugees remain open. In this context, each escalation carries the risk of undermining diplomatic achievements already made. Looking back, one sees that Israel is not a simple story of victory or defeat. It is the story of a nation born from the tragedy of the 20th century, growing amid a harsh security environment, and constantly seeking recognition and long-term stability. Each generation of Israelis faces different questions, but they ultimately revolve around two central axes: how to ensure the safety of its people and how to live in peace with its neighbors. At the intersection of history and the present, Israel becomes a mirror reflecting the paradoxes of the modern age: the desire for self-determination and the need for coexistence, military strength and the aspiration for reconciliation, national identity and universal values. This journey is not yet complete, and it is precisely in that incompleteness that the story of Israel continues to be written each day, opening a space for reflection for anyone concerned with the fate of small nations amid the great tides of history. As we enter the final part of this journey, perhaps the most important task is not to list more events, but to confront the essential question: where will Israel go in the 21st century? A nation born from painful memory, matured through war, and integrated into the world through technology and diplomacy, now stands at a generational crossroads. By 2023, Israel had existed for 75 years since its declaration of independence on the 14th of May in 1948. During that time, its population grew from fewer than 1 million to more than 9 million people. From an agricultural economy dependent on aid, Israel became a member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development on the 7th of September in 2010. These figures reflect rapid development, but behind each step forward were political and social decisions that were far from easy. The future of Israel revolves around 3 major axes. The first is its relationship with the Palestinians. After decades of conflict and incomplete negotiations, the two-state solution remains the option most frequently referenced in international resolutions, including Resolution 242 of 1967 and Resolution 338 of the 22nd of October in 1973 of the United Nations Security Council, calling for a ceasefire and the implementation of earlier principles. However, The political reality on the ground has changed significantly since those documents. Jewish settlements in the West Bank, the division between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and recurring cycles of violence have made the prospect of a final agreement more complex than ever. Each new generation on both sides grows up with its own memories, and those memories will shape how they view the future. The second axis is regional positioning. The Abraham Accords signed in 2020 opened opportunities for economic and security cooperation with several Arab countries. Relations between Israel and Egypt have remained stable since the peace treaty of the 26th of March in 1979, and with Jordan since the 26th of October in 1994. However, the Middle Eastern security environment remains volatile. Shifts in the policies of major powers, tensions with Iran, and the presence of armed groups in the region require Israel to maintain a high level of readiness. In this context, diplomacy and defense are not separate, but complementary elements of long-term strategy. The third axis is internal social strength. Population growth, differences between religious and secular groups, between urban centers and peripheral regions, and between Jewish citizens and Arab citizens create a multi-layered social structure. High birth rates in both the Orthodox Jewish and Arab communities may alter demographic balances in the coming decades. This raises questions about education, the labor market, and the sharing of civic responsibilities. Debates over judicial reform in 2023 show that Israeli society is willing to engage in dialogue, but also reflect a significant degree of polarization. A democracy in constant debate is a sign of vitality, yet it requires the capacity for compromise to avoid deeper divisions. Amid all these factors, Israel continues to carry the legacy of its past. Memories of the Holocaust, of wars of survival, and of the early days of statehood exist not only in textbooks, but in commemorations, in families, and in civic education. At the same time, younger generations grow up in a globalized environment, connected to the world through technology, with different perspectives on identity and security. The intersection of memory and modernity creates a society that both preserves tradition and seeks innovation. It can be said that Israel in the 21st century is no longer simply an outpost in the desert, but a nation that simultaneously faces security challenges while deeply participating in global economic and scientific networks. The strength of this nation lies not only in its military or technology, but in its ability to question itself. A country that once stood on the brink of annihilation must now learn how to govern success, manage diversity, and sustain peace. Thus, the journey of Israel is not complete. It continues to be written through the decisions of leaders, the votes of citizens, and the choices of each family about how to raise their children in a constantly changing environment. And when one looks across the entire path, from the inscriptions on the ancient Merneptah stele to the diplomatic agreements of the 21st century, it becomes clear that the story of Israel is not only the story of a single people, but a lesson about the power of memory, the cost of conflict, and the enduring desire to live safely on the land one calls home. After all the timelines, agreements, wars, and negotiations, there remains a quieter yet deeper question. How do people in Israel today live amid these overlapping layers of history? For a nation is not measured only by its borders or military strength, but by the everyday rhythm of individual lives. A morning in Jerusalem may begin with the sound of church bells from the Christian quarter, the call to prayer from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the recitation of the Torah in Jewish synagogues. The three great monotheistic religions of the world coexist within just a few square kilometers. Jerusalem was declared the capital of Israel in the Declaration of Independence on the 14th of May in 1948, and on the 30th of July in 1980, the Knesset passed the Basic Law, Jerusalem, capital of Israel, affirming the city as complete and united. The status of Jerusalem remains one of the most sensitive issues in international negotiations, but for its residents, it is also a space of daily life, where bakers, bus drivers, and teachers live among sacred symbols. In Tel Aviv, the rhythm of life is different. Founded in 1909 as a Jewish neighborhood outside Jaffa, it has become a vibrant financial and cultural center. Its Bauhaus buildings, recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site in 2003, form the distinctive White City. By day, technology labs and startup companies operate at full capacity. By night, beaches and cafes are filled with laughter. In a region marked by instability, Tel Aviv is often described as an oasis of creativity and freedom. In the north, Haifa is a place where Jewish and Arab communities live together in high density, and it is also a major industrial center. In the south, the Negev Desert, once regarded by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion as the future of the country, now hosts universities, research facilities, and new settlements. Ben-Gurion moved to live at Kibbutz Sde Boker in 1953, hoping to encourage development of this desert region. The image of the first prime minister choosing a simple life in the Negev became a symbol of building from difficult beginnings. Education and military service are two factors that shape Israeli youth. The conscription law enacted in 1949 requires most Jewish male and female citizens to serve in the Israel Defense Forces upon reaching adulthood. For many families, the moment of sending their children to enlist is a rite of passage, both a source of pride and anxiety. At the same time, universities such as the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, founded in 1925, and the Technion in Haifa, founded in 1924, play central roles in training human resources and advancing scientific research. Alongside its achievements, Israeli society also faces universal challenges: income inequality, rising housing costs, and differences in labor market participation among various population groups. The social protests of 2011 reflected a desire to improve the economic conditions of the middle class and younger generations. The story is not only about external conflict, but also about an internal journey toward fairness and opportunity. A distinctive feature of Israel is the strong preservation of collective memory through commemorative days. Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah, is observed annually in April or May, according to the Jewish calendar. At 10 in the morning, sirens sound across the entire country for 2 minutes, and people stand still, whether on highways or in offices. That moment serves as a reminder that history does not exist only in books, but lives within every family. Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism, Yom HaZikaron, takes place just before Independence Day, creating a deeply emotional transition between mourning and celebration. Looking at daily life, one sees that Israel is not only a place of conflict, but also a place where people love, debate, create, and hope. Busy cafes, outdoor concerts, and families gathering during holidays are all part of that story. A nation that has repeatedly faced danger must now learn how to live with both joy and anxiety in the same space. As the city lights gradually fade and the noise quiets, what remains is the question of the road ahead. Israel has gone through more than 70 years of upheaval, yet the future still holds possibilities not yet defined. And in the final part, we will look back at this entire journey as a mirror, reflecting the fate of small nations amid the great waves of world history. 75 years is not a long period when compared to 3,000 years of a people's history, but it is enough time for a nation to leave its own mark on the world map. From the 14th of May in 1948 until now, Israel has experienced war, peace, division, and integration. Each event has left a layer of sediment in the national consciousness. As it moves into the future, Israel carries not only the achievements and challenges of the present, but also a collective memory shaped across generations. One of the greatest questions ahead is the relationship with the Palestinians. From Resolution 181 of the 29th of November in 1947 to subsequent United Nations documents, the international community has repeatedly referred to the two-state solution. However, political realities on the ground have changed over decades. The fate of Jerusalem, the future of settlements in the West Bank, Israel's security, and Palestinian self-determination remain unresolved issues. Every decision made today may affect generations to come. Alongside this is the question of regional integration. After the Abraham Accords of the 15th of September in 2020, economic and security cooperation between Israel and several Arab states has expanded. Direct flights, trade agreements, and joint technology projects show that the Middle East is no longer completely locked within old boundaries. However, the geopolitical environment remains highly fluid. Alliances may shift according to strategic interests and international contexts. Israel must both maintain its defensive capabilities and seek sustainable channels of dialogue. Another challenge lies within the structure of society itself. Israel's population continues to grow, with high birth rates in certain communities. The balance between religious and secular groups, between Jewish citizens and Arab citizens, and between central and peripheral regions will influence policies in education, economics, and welfare for decades to come. Debates over the role of the judiciary, the distribution of power among branches of government, and the rights and duties of citizens reflect a dynamic but also tense society. The maturity of Israeli democracy will be measured by its ability to reconcile differences without weakening unity. In the global landscape, Israel occupies a distinctive position. The country is a center of technological innovation, maintains close relations with the United States, and at the same time expands cooperation with Asia and Europe. As a member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development since the 7th of September in 2010, Israel participates deeply in international economic and scientific networks. This brings opportunities, but also responsibilities in adhering to international standards and contributing to regional stability. Looking more broadly, the story of Israel revolves around a central axis: the right to exist safely on the land it considers its homeland. That right was affirmed in the Declaration of Independence on the 14th of May in 1948 and reiterated in many international forums. Yet sustainable existence does not rely solely on military strength or political alliances, but also on the ability to build trust with neighbors and with its own citizens. 3,000 years ago, the name Israel was carved onto an ancient Egyptian stone stele. 2,000 years ago, a temple was destroyed and a people entered exile. 75 years ago, a state declared independence amid gunfire. Today, Israel stands in the age of globalization, where technology connects people faster than ever, but conflict spreads just as quickly. The history of Israel reminds us that memory can be a source of strength, but can also become a barrier if it is not transformed into dialogue. This story does not end with a simple conclusion. Israel continues to write new chapters every day, with each decision. And perhaps the most important thing is not to predict the future, but to understand that every people carries both the light and the shadows of its history. By listening to this journey, we do not only understand more about a Middle Eastern country, but also about how human beings search for meaning, safety, and hope amid the shifting currents of the world. As we close this journey, what remains is not merely a list of dates, agreements, or wars recorded in history. What remains is the image of a people who have passed through 3,000 years of history and still retain their name. From the ancient stone stele bearing the word Israel to the 14th of May in 1948, when a state was declared amid gunfire, that continuity has never been entirely broken. Israel is a story of memory. Memory of a temple destroyed in the year 70 after Christ. Memory of communities scattered across Europe and the Middle East for centuries. Memory of the Holocaust ending in 1945, leaving 6 million lives that never returned. But Israel is also a story of choice. The choice to build in the desert. The choice to sign a peace treaty with Egypt on the 26th of March in 1979. The choice to shake hands in Washington on the 13th of September in 1993. The choice to normalize relations with Arab countries on the 15th of September in 2020. Each choice carries both hope and consequence. Some see Israel as a symbol of the power of survival. Others see it as the center of an unresolved conflict. Both perspectives reflect part of the truth. A nation can be both a refuge for painful memory and a focal point of international debate. A people can both long for safety and struggle to coexist with memories that are not their own. If one listens carefully, the story of Israel is not only about a land in the Middle East. It is about the human instinct to endure. When everything is lost, what remains? When a nation is gained, what must be preserved? When the weight of the past is overwhelming, how can it be prevented from fully determining the future? 3,000 years ago, Israel was just a name carved in stone. 2,000 years ago, it was a quiet prayer whispered in small homes across continents. 75 years ago, it became the name of a state recognized internationally. Today, Israel is both a geopolitical reality and a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. This history is not monochrome. It contains the light of creativity, science, and youthful cities. It also contains the shadows of war and division. Looking to the future, perhaps the important thing is not to predict what Israel will become in 10 or 20 years. What matters is understanding that every nation must confront its memory and learn how to transform that memory into responsibility. Israel is no exception. Amid debates and instability, amid achievements and challenges, the journey of this nation reminds us that history is never completely closed. It always leaves a door open for new choices. And as we leave this story, what echoes is not the sound of gunfire or sirens, but a quiet question for each of us. If we had to pass through centuries of loss, would we still hold on to faith in a safe tomorrow? Israel has chosen to answer that question through its existence. The rest, time will continue to write.